Grace, I want you to introduce yourself, your full name, your maiden name, and tell us, first of all, where you were born, something a little bit about yourself, and then connect to your parents and your ancestors.
Okay.
And then we're going to get the question after that would be your first ancestor who was in the United States, probably the railroad worker, but we'll have you tell the story.
Oh.
Now about yourself now.
Okay. Hi, my first name is Grace. My maiden name is T-O-W, and in Chinese, in Cantonese, it's in Chou. In 普通话，我姓曹。我的中国名是曹江华，Chou Jianghua is my name. So I was born in Oakland, California, on April 20th, 1917. And I married Hong Li October 27th, 1945. So my name, I'm known as Grace Lee.
And about your parents. Okay, well, you were born in Oakland. What was your family like? What did your parents do?
Excuse me?
So you were born in Oakland. Now, what were your parents doing? What kind of work?
Okay. I was born in Oakland on 9th Street, I think it was, on top of a tailor shop, because my mother and my uncle and his wife owned a tailor shop, and they did tailoring. And my father had taught himself English, and he was en route to being the manager of a restaurant owned by the Tao clan in Providence, Rhode Island. So those are my parents. But my mother was born here in San Francisco, and so was my grandmother. But my father was born in China and came here in 1903 when he was 14 years old as a merchant's son. And we are both my mother and my father's antecedents are from Guangzhou province, Cantonese.
Are they Toisan or Zhengshan? Do you know if they're Toisan or?
Well, oh, definitely. The county is Toisan, but in the past it was called Sunning.
Sunning Railroad. Now, how big was your family?
Oh, there were just the two of us. My sister, who was 2 years younger than I. No brothers, just the two of us. And she was born November 11th, 1918.
So how about your schooling? Did your parents encourage you to get an education?
Oh, they were typically Chinese. They were great on education. My grandmother was also literate, and she couldn't write, but she knew Chinese history backwards and forwards.
Did you know did she live with you? Did your grandmother live with you?
No, my grandmother did not live with us at that time, no.
So how do you know about your oral history? I mean, how do you know that you are related to a railroad worker?
Now, I'm not related, my antecedents were not related with the railroad workers at all, but on the periphery. My maternal grandfather was an herbalist who had an herb store in San Francisco, and my paternal grandfather came as a merchant, and he had a grocery store. But in addition to having Chinese groceries, he was also the banker, because the Chinese at that time did not trust the American banks, and but one of his own.
So what was his name? What was the banker's name? What was his name?
Okay, I need.
Yes. So this is the person with the grocery store.
This is the grocery store. Okay.
His name?
Oh, my paternal grandfather's name was Tao Fong.Stanford. And he arrived in 1840 after having sailed 3 to 4 months from China. And he worked at first in Stockton for a few years on farms, and then later returned to San Francisco, and he opened a grocery store on Waverly Street. And he was there until, 1906, there was this awful earthquake, and it was terrible, and he felt so responsible for all the money he was holding. He died being heartbroken, as if he had betrayed the trust of people who had deposited their money with him. In fact, he kept the money in a chodoi, in a grass mats. It was stolen, but he made my uncle, my father's older brother, and my father promise to reimburse all these people because he kept the books. Oh, I want to say something else. A lot of people are under the illusion that the Chinese came here working on the railroads were illiterate. They weren't. They could read and write. Not all of them, but a lot of them. And not only that, in the Mother Lode in Plymouth, California, you can still just see to this day what they still extant are the Chinese walls. They're about yay high, demarcating the claims, and there's some old structures there, with they had herbs and all kinds of stuff, but the books were all written in Chinese, and Chinese is an extremely difficult language, and to say that these people were ignorant is a travesty. It wasn't true.
You have proof of that. So this ancestor, Tao, you say his name was Tao Tung?
A T-O-W, and the name is F-U-N-G-J-O-N, Chou Feng-Zhen.
Chou Feng-Zhen. So Chou Feng-Zhen, you said that he came in the 1840s? That's very early.
Yes, he did. Now this I had written down because I asked my father, first of all, Chinese, I don't know, are very, very secretive. It was just like pulling teeth to get information, but I wrote it down. I said, unless you tell me, posterity will not know what happened. And so I pinpointed my father, tell me, when did your father come here? And he wrote down 1840.
1840.
That's a long time ago.
That was before the gold rush. That was amazing. Now, do you have any documentation on his coming that early, or?
That would probably be in the archives, because I've seen pictures of my father when he came. They all had the queue. My father finally cut it off in 1907, but I'm sure there are documents in the archives which I have not researched.
Yes, it's probably from the testimony, like when did your ancestor first? So is this grandfather, is he the first ancestor of your family to come to the United States?
I believe so.
And do you know what he did when he came? What kind of work did he do when he came?
Well, he came, first of all, as I said, he worked and went to Stockton and worked on the farms. Mm-hmm. Then he came back to San Francisco and opened the grocery store.
So do you think that he's sent provisions to...
Do you say it, what?
Well, I'm thinking about the connection with the railroads, because you said that your ancestors work in the peripheral businesses with the railroad.
Well, his only contact then would be to help these people deposit their money, and relay back home to their families. That would be the connection.
That would be the connection. Was he like a member of a gongso,
yes.
Chinese
yes.
district association?
Yes. Well, I don't think in the very early beginning there were they call the gongso, which they call the tongs, which is a misnomer because it's a family thing, you know. Like Seising, four names, and they'll have the Zhenggaso, you know, various surnames.
And then, now, who was involved with the herb store?
That was my maternal grandfather. Now that's documented.
Okay.
Because I've seen it.
About him, maternal. And his name? Do you have his name?
Okay. All right. The last name is Jin, G-I-N. Now, in Chinese, even in Cantonese, there's so many dialects. You know, Martin Yan and Yan can cook. Sing Chen, sing Yan, Yan, Chen, Jin, Lo Jin, you know. Say yep, different, but anyway, the last name is Jin. And L-U-N-C-H-E-E, Zhen Dongqi.
So this maternal grandfather.
Yes, it's right over there, Laurie.
Yes, we want to know when he came over.
He came 1845.
Oh my.
So the paper or the photos?
The picture of my grandfather there? No.
This one?
Yeah, that's it. Oops. I'm sitting on something.
Don't worry.
What should I do?
So Grace,
Just sit down. Sit comfortably first.
1845
Are you comfortable?
Yeah.
is very early. That's before the gold rush. So that is your
This is my grandfather.
maternal grandfather. You want to show us? Yeah.
This is
There,
my grand.
Just like that.
Okay. My grandfather.
A very handsome young man. So, do you know if that photograph was on a passport? How did you get that photograph?
It was in the archives.
In the archives, I see.
Now, he came, all I remember, he came in a sailing boat, and because the Manchus insisted that the Chinese be subjugated, this is what another thing that they were always talking about, the Chinese and the pigtail. And, you know, and they think it was so funny to cut off the pigtail. Well, the thing was just the Manchu, that was a sign of the subjugation. If you were caught without the hue, you were killed. But anyway.
So he came and did he stay?
Okay, he opened the store, the herb store called CHEESANGTONG, Jisangtong, at 710 DuPont Street in San Francisco.
710.
710.
Right. They were
My
neighbors.
grandmother was born at 712 DuPont Street.
Wow. This was a street with merchants' stores, and their families lived upstairs or behind
Yeah,
the
that's
store.
right.
Yeah.
But anyway, this is my paternal grandfather. They had 4 children.
Okay, the paternal,
This is my maternal.
maternal. Okay, 4 children. Mhm.
Yeah, and the first one, a daughter, born in April of 1888, and then a boy, my uncle, in July of 1890, then my mother, June in 1892, and then my youngest uncle in December of 1895. Now, very unfortunately, on the 14th of October, 1896, my grandfather was shot and killed on the street. And it was some disgruntled person, but I never got the full detail. So what happened was the store was had 17 partners, and my grandmother got $1,000, and how she managed to raise 4 children is remarkable. But as I say, I don't know why they didn't tell us, but I know that she was a seamstress. And you know the Chinese frogs, you know, nao yi.
Yeah, all right.
So they did a lot of sewing, and somehow she managed to raise 4 children.
In San Francisco, Chinatown. On Bill
San Francisco,
Street.
Chinatown. And there are pictures, I'm terrible with the computer. The computer doesn't like me. But I have pictures showing the children and all. It's very interesting.
I have a question. So the grandfather that was the banker?
Excuse me?
The grandfather that was the banker, did he?
No, this is not the banker.
Yeah, no, I know. The other grandfather.
Yeah, this is my maternal
I
grandfather.
understand. The other grandfather, though, were there any records of him sending the monies back to China, or all the records were destroyed?
I don't know what happened at the time, but I know that he you know, the one thing that we were taught was honesty. You know how the Chinese are, and he was just brokenhearted that this happened to him, that he had betrayed. It seemed that he had betrayed his compatriots. You know, it's very sad. But
so actually, his grocery store was served as a bank, right?
yes,
Yeah, he just kept the money for
yeah.
them. And how long did he live? What was his?
Well, he died shortly after in 1906,
Oh,
right after the earthquake, because it was such a terrible blow to him mentally.
So
I never saw my grandmother, my paternal grandmother.
First of all, both of your grandfathers came very early.
Yes.
Did they send for their wives, or did they go back to get married?
Well, don't you remember the 1882 Exclusion Act? The Chinese were not allowed to bring their wives over, neither the Japanese, any Asian. So then that's how you know, Zhouji, you understand.
Yeah, right. So how did they get married? How did they have families? Did they
Well,
send for
it
them?
just happened that my father met my mother. Oh, at this time, you know, it's Shanghai革命, it's called the Young America Association, where the overseas Chinese would contribute to the revolution, the 1912 Shanghai革命, Xinhai革命. Anyway, I have a picture over there, Barry. You will see. No, that's my grandmother. No, no.
Revolution.
I'll tell you where it is. That's the one in your right hand.
Right.
No.
Yeah, the revolutionary.
Okay.
group, yeah.
This is a picture taken in 1911 at Portsmouth Square in San Francisco. These are the people of the Zhongmengwei. In this corner, there are 3 women. My grandmother, my mother, and one other lady. My father is here, in the front here, and also Dr. Sun Jung-san here. And this here is... Now, I asked my father to tell me who are these other people. And would you believe it? He wouldn't identify any of them.
Oh, that's Sun Jung-san right in the
That's
middle.
it. Now, that was published in the Red Book from the PR, the People's Republic. Barry.
Wow. Yeah. All right.
Okay. I have a...
Yeah. There it is.
There it is.
Yeah.
So I think it was kind of interesting.
It is. Well, that's great. That's a very good
This picture that somebody found and put in there.
We should have this copied for the Chinese historicals. We had an exhibit on Sun Yat-sen in America.
Yeah.
We did not have this picture.
You didn't?
We did not have this picture.
Well, you haven't.
We'll have to copy it.
Yeah.
So, well, it seems as if then your grandmothers, one of them was born in the United States.
That's right, my mother's mother, yes.
So she met. So that's how your grandfather could marry somebody, you know, in the United
That's
States.
right.
She was born.
And they were married. Oh, I have that even, because that was in the archives. I'll tell you when they were married. because they saw the need, you know, even though they weren't out, you know, working on the railroads, but they needed food, they needed other things, and they supplied that, but not to the extent, because they were limited in the growth of their business because of the times.
So do you
That would
think,
come later on.
so
Because, you know, it was terrible. The Chinese must go, you know, and Kearney was just so awful. And it's a wonder how the people survived.
well, we have information that some of the herb stores sold to other Chinatowns, and they sold to people who.
Oh, they must have.
Yes.
They must have.
And so,
But I do not know that connection at all. But you would assume that.
yes, and the other assumption is the Chinese railroad workers had herbs because they didn't have modern medicine and they didn't have a Western
That's
medicine,
right.
access to Western medicine. So they had regular supplies of herbs from San Francisco. So very possibly these herbs could have come from your paternal grandfather's store.
Right.
Yeah. So how did you get to Oakland? Was this after the earthquake?
How did I get to what?
How did your family end up in Oakland?
Oh, but what happened was after the earthquake, you know, San Francisco was completely devastated, so they went across the bay and lived in Oakland, Chinatown.
And what kind of business did this?
Well, my mother and my uncle and my aunt, his wife, took a tailoring class, and they opened a tailor shop, and it was called Gaising on 9th Street, and that's where I was born.
I see. And did the business do well?
No, because you can't compete, you know, with industrialization. You know, it may be finely tailored, but it's ahead of the times. You know, you know, things have to be cheap, and people would buy from mass production rather than from individual tailoring.
Well, tell us something.
Then my mother was also a telephone operator at the exchange in San Francisco.
So
My mother was literate. She spoke English and knew both English and Chinese.
So she worked at the telephone exchange?
Yeah.
When she lived in Oakland or when she lived
No, in San Francisco.
I see. And
But see, then after that, in 1915, I was born in 17, we moved to Providence, Rhode Island, where my father's clan had this huge restaurant. It was very upscale. They had a floor show and all the rest. And my father was hired as a manager because he learned to speak English. And I can read you what he wrote to me, because the other people, they banded, the Tao clan banded together and built this restaurant. And it's still extant today. It's called Port Arthur Restaurant in Providence, Rhode Island.
was that the name that you remember?
No, the one, when I was there as a child, lived there until I was 5, was on 123 Way Bossett Street in Providence, and the name of the restaurant was King Fong.
King Fong. And it had a floor show. This was in the 20s or 30s?
Oh, then the in the 20s.
Okay.
I remember the first song I learned was Over There. Over There.
Oh, that's World War I.
World War I.
So how long did you live in Providence, Rhode
I
Island?
lived until I was 5, 17 and 5. We came back to Oakland in 1923.
And then you could talk about your education and how you got into the service.
Me? Oh.
Yes, yes.
Well, then from Oakland, we went to Stockton, where we had an herb store. And I went to high school
In Stockton.
in Stockton, and we then came the Depression. We came back out to Oakland, and by this time my father had retired, and he didn't do anything very much, but let's see, now I'm 16, and I entered the university, and so I graduated in 37, and I was 20, and I worked in Sacramento at the State Personnel Board, and came out to San Francisco, eventually worked for the Department of Employment, because back then you were lucky to have a civil service job. And then, let me see, it's now called Human Resources, I think. Then came the war, and I felt that I should participate, and so I enlisted in the service, and I was going to, should I tell you what happened?
Yes.
Okay. There were three of us, Ruthie, Leonard, and I. And Ruthie went into the Red Cross, Lenny went into the Red Cross, and I thought, aha, I will go into the Red Cross. And this is God's truth. I interviewed, and to my disbelief, I was not accepted because I was not, quote, unquote, typically American. Now this happened also when I tried to get into the Waves, but anyway, I was bound and determined to do my share, and I enlisted in the service, and eventually got into the Air Corps, and I was assigned to the wing where we trained the cadets under Chiang Kai-shek, under Lend-Lease. And then after the war, I was in for 2 years, came home, and my husband went to Berkeley under the GI Bill of Rights and got his engineering degree. Then we had two children, and after my second child was born, I stayed home for 10 years, and then home after the, let's see, came to work for SRI, and I went to work at Stanford, and I worked at Stanford in the School of Medicine, Department of Surgery for 26 years under the same boss who was the head of the, he was the chairman of the Department of Surgery. And then I retired when I was 72 and a half, and that's the end.
Well, I want you to talk about your husband. Could you tell us your husband's name and the fact that you met him, right? You met him
okay.
in the service.
My husband's name is Hong Lee, and he was born in Castroville on August 10, 1923, and I met him at Santa Ana Army Air Base in the bowling alley, of all places. And we were married at, finally we went from station to station as the group was, the whole wing was being transferred. We finally ended up at Maxwell Field in Montgomery, Alabama, and I was married at the Catholic Chapel at Montgomery, Alabama.
Did you ever serve overseas?
No, did not. What I did, see, Hong, okay, Hong, my husband was in the service, and because they give you the Army intelligence test, and he had a choice of going into medicine, engineering, or something else under the ASTP, which is called the Army Special Training Program. And so he said, okay, I'll take medicine, but the officer in charge said, you only have a high school education, and you will be competing with people who've already had a college degree, and I would advise against that. And he said, okay, I'll take engineering. Well, the same is true there. So he said, how about foreign language, and where's that being held? Harvard. He said, I'll take that. So he was at Harvard for 2 years under the Army the ASTP program to be an interpreter, and he was scheduled to go, what do they call it now, the, not the CIA, but behind the lines in China. But anyway, what ended up was he ended up with this wing training because of his knowledge of Chinese and English. And then after he graduated from the university, he worked at the Stanford Research Institute until then he, with two or three other people who started Advanced Research Application Corporation, and he worked with them until he retired.
So both you and your husband, well, you speak Chinese in 2 dialects. Where did you learn Chinese? You're a 3rd generation.
Oh, in my days, at home you were not allowed to speak English. And because they said, so I spoke Cantonese, both Samyup and Sayup, 3rd dialect, and 4th dialect, which is Sayup. But I learned Mandarin first when I was in college in 1933, but then I only had 2 years, and that wasn't sufficient. So when China opened up in 1978, I was working at Stanford, and I audited Mr. Zhuang's Chinese classes for 4 years, and I learned a great deal from him. They're a wonderful person whose father was the director of the museum in Taiwan, but I went through my paces. That's where I learned my Mandarin. Oh, also at the time, in the 70s, China had opened up, and a lot of the exchange students came from China. And doctors, these are the China's graduates, on the doctoral level. And it was very funny. Hong had a Q clearance, security clearance, and of course, at that time, you weren't supposed to associate with communist China and so forth. But I felt so sorry for them. They were so far at home. They always came to our house and, for dinner and so forth. And as a result, I have very many good friends in China today. And one of them, whose grandfather was Zhou Zongtang, the general's chicken. Well, anyway, Guan Chen, it was the vice mayor of Shanghai. And now she does a lot of liaison between China and the countries. And so about when I was 6 years ago, I took my daughter and my 2 grandsons to China so that they could see China for the first time. And boy, were we royally treated. And then I have another friend who is a chemist, who's now in New Zealand, but I have a whole group of people that I correspond with. And it's nice to see what their children are doing, after their exposure here.
And have you been to the ancestral village in Taiwan?
No, I have never been back to my Guheng, my Guxian. I just didn't. It would have been too emotional.
Now, why is that?
Hmm?
Why is that? Because of the connection with your parents? And
Excuse me?
yes, you said it'd be too emotional?
Yes,
Yeah.
because you see, my generation of the American born here, the majority went to Chinese school after American school, and it was, you're Chinese, you're Chinese, you're Chinese. But with the succeeding generation, you're American, you're American. But my generation observed so many of the old Chinese customs, except that my family was very progressive. We did not celebrate the lunar Chinese New Year, but the American Gregorian, because of the connection with the revolution, the 1912, when the 16-year-old Lo Cao conceived and designed the Chinese flag, you know, the 12 stars, the red with the blue, white for the heaven, and the white for blue for the sky, and the 12 rays for the 12 hours of the day, and so forth. So I followed of course, the whole gamut of history, you know, through Edgar Snow's Red Star over China and all the rest, but until the present day.
So it sounds like your parents and grandparents were very progressive, and they were,
Yes.
yeah, they were supporters of Sun Yat-sen.
Yes.
So did you talk to your you don't remember your grandparents, your grandfather, because they died before you were born,
No.
right? Your grandfather.
None of my, the only one I know is my grandmother. The other grandmother was in China who never came here, and then my two grandfathers were deceased.
But did your grandmother tell you stories?
Well, my grandmother told us Chinese stories, Chinese, you know, Ma Lao Wong, you know, Sai Yao Gei, and all the Monkey Kingdom, and all the wonderful stories. And we would say, Po, Po, Gong Gu Jai, Gong Gu Jai. Grandmother tells us to, but as far as the family was concerned, mum's a word. For some reason, they just never, her feet weren't bound, but she bound my mother's feet, my aunt's feet. Wasn't that awful? And that is just, now Lisa C. describes that foot binding, which is absolutely inhuman. It's so torturous, it's bending the heels to meet the toes. It was terrible. It was just terrible, but...
So she bound your mother's feet, even though she could walk around.
That's right. And my aunt's feet, poor thing, anyway, my mother wore size 2, and then when unbinding the feet was awful too. But I made up for it. Wear size 9s.
Yeah, right. Well, that is unusual that your family was involved with Sun Yat-sen, but your grandmother, you know, she believed in foot binding because Sun Yat-sen tried to ban foot binding.
Oh yes, oh yes. Also, they met up with Dr. Sun Yat-sen and wanted to go to China to help, but he said, no, do what you can here in the United States, you know, with your children. And the progeny has done very well.
Sounds like it's been very successful. Now, were you aware during World War II, when in 1943 the exclusion law was repealed? Were you aware of that?
Of course. Yeah. Yes, my father got his American citizenship in 46. Yeah. My Chinese girlfriends were his witnesses.
Oh. So, and you worked at Stanford for many years. You worked at Stanford.
That's right.
Yeah, the medical center?
Medical school, yes.
And were you aware of the history of the railroad and the big
Oh,
four?
heavens, yes. Yes, I read extensively. And then, you know, Russell Lowe, you know, you really should get hold of him because he's documented everything and written a thing all about his family and what they did. And his grandfather is just absolutely amazing. He went to Salem, Oregon, and had a hop field. I wish I had it here, but I gave all this stuff to my cousin Ezra, who's doing genealogy. But Dr. Lowe is a specialist in MRI, and he's in San Diego. But he has it all documented. And that's how he contacted me because of what you were doing. And he said that I was so eloquent. I don't know how eloquent I am. No, but he is amazing.
Yeah, your history is remarkable. I think what's remarkable is your ancestors came so early. Your ancestors came so early.
Well, I'm kind of old, you know. I'm 96.
You don't look 96. And your memories are just wonderful. And your career is unusual. The fact that you were in the service.
44. I was only in the service about almost 2 years.
So you were very patriotic. I mean, did you feel you must have just stood up for the fact I'm an American, right? And everybody regarded you as not quite. I mean, the Americans, the so-called your bosses, the people who are hiring, of course, looked upon you as Chinese.
That's right.
Where did your kids go to school?
Pardon?
Where did your children go to school?
Where did your children go to school? Your daughter and your son?
They're both Stanford graduates, and Michael got his master's at USF, and Donna did her medicine at Tulane, and then she did a residency at Harvard for 5 years. She's she's a board-certified psychiatrist.
Both your children went to undergraduate at Stanford University.
Both of them.
Yeah. Must have been very proud.
Well, it was, back then, since I worked there, they went tuition-free, which was quite a boon.
Yeah. What years did they graduate?
Pardon?
What year did they graduate? What
Oh,
years?
gee, I can't remember. Let's see, 75, 79, something like that. 75. I don't remember the dates. Dates and I aren't very good.
And did you tell them a lot of his family history? Did they grow up knowing the family history?
Oh, they should.
Yeah.
But Michael will always say, with Mom, if it's final, it's final.
Did you send them to Chinese school in Palo Alto?
No, they wouldn't go, and my husband didn't want me to. I shouldn't have listened to him, but he didn't want them to have the conflict of identity, and I did not teach them Chinese, and they don't even speak the language, which is unfortunate.
But did you feel that, they went to Pali High, right? Did they go to Pali High?
No, they went to, where did they go?
Gun?
Oh, Cubberley.
Cubberley. Oh, that's when Cubberley.
Because this is within walking distance.
Right. That's the school.
That's why we bought this house, because because of the rating of Cubberley and the proximity. Because I went back to work full time when Donna was 10. But in this neighborhood, they were all children, and all the mothers are around,
And did they identify with being Asian American? Because that was in the 70s.
Well, see, most of the people were Caucasians here. Then, in Stockton, I grew up amidst Caucasians because I didn't live in Chinatown. In fact, I won something in the library, some contest, and because actually there was segregation based on economy and based on races, because you couldn't buy places to, they would not sell. Well, my cousin, who was my Mary was a lieutenant colonel, was in the service with the Purple Heart, couldn't buy a place in San Mateo for the longest time. Can you imagine that? Well, anyway, here he was returning from the war and all, with 6 boys. But we shall overcome.
Very good.
I'm very, very satisfied with that. That's an amazing interview. It's
what?
Amazing. It's an amazing interview. Your memory is incredible.
Oh, I don't
know.
Yeah.
And I really feel that you have the sensibility, of all the history and this experience. And I like your last line.
Yeah. I can't think of anything else.
I can't think of anything else. The only thing I wanted to do is I'm going to take down some of the specifics of the